5,000 of Rome's finest soldiers vanished from the face of the earth. This is the enduring mystery of the 9th Legion, the Legio IX Hispana, an entire military unit that marched into the fog of history and never marched out. By the end of this journey, you will sift through the evidence yourself, weighing theories from a bloody ambush in the Scottish Highlands to a silent bureaucratic erasure. We will follow their last known footsteps and confront a historical silence so profound it has spawned legends of ghostly armies and journeys to the edge of the known world. What do you believe happens when an empire loses its memory? To understand how an entire legion could disappear, we must first understand what a legion truly was. A Roman legion was not just a large group of soldiers. It was a self-contained city on the march, a complete society forged in iron and discipline. At its heart were 5,600 men. These were the legionaries, citizen soldiers clad in segmented plate armor, carrying the iconic rectangular shield, the scutum, and armed with a deadly short stabbing sword, the gladius. But surrounding this corps were hundreds more: cavalry scouts, engineers who could build a bridge in a day, surveyors, doctors, blacksmiths, and administrative clerks. This was a mobile fortress of over 6,000 souls, and its loss would be a catastrophic blow, both militarily and to the very prestige of Rome itself. The 9th Legion was one of these formidable instruments. Its full title was Legio IX Hispana, the 9th Spanish Legion, a name earned through hard campaigning in the Iberian Peninsula. Most scholars believe it was founded by the great general Pompey around the year 65 BC, making it one of Rome's oldest and most experienced units. Its true legend, however, was forged under Gaius Julius Caesar. The 9th was Caesar's workhorse during his brutal conquest of Gaul. It fought at the Siege of Alesia, that monumental battle where Caesar defeated the Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix, a victory that changed the map of Europe. The legion's emblem, thought to be a charging bull, symbolized both strength and a connection to the Spanish fields where it first earned its name. For decades after the conquest of Britannia, the 9th found its home. Its long-term base was the fortress of Eboracum, what we now call York, in northern England. From this bustling garrison town of stone and timber, the 9th Legion projected Roman power onto the empire's most dangerous and mysterious frontier. To the north lay Caledonia, a land of mist-shrouded mountains, thick forests, and fierce tribes who refused to bow to Rome. The 9th was the northern hammer, the primary force tasked with holding that volatile line. They patrolled the Great Wall begun by Emperor Hadrian, responded to raids, and launched punitive expeditions into the wild highlands. They were the bulwark against chaos, a symbol of permanent order in a land that seemed to resist it at every turn. This was a legion steeped in history, hardened by a century of warfare, and entrusted with the security of an entire province. Its sudden, complete vanishing was not just a mystery. It was an impossibility. The trail of the 9th Legion begins to fade with the very stones they left behind. In the damp earth beneath modern York, archaeologists have unearthed roofing tiles, heavy and red, stamped clearly with the letters LEGIXHISP. These humble objects are like frozen echoes, placing the legion firmly at its Eboracum fortress around the year 108 AD. They were there, maintaining their great northern base. Around the same time, there is evidence the 9th, or at least a detachment from it, was involved in building a fort at Nijmegen, in the province of Germania Inferior. This suggests a period of movement, perhaps a temporary assignment to bolster another frontier. But after these moments, the solid ground of history turns to shifting sand. By the early 2nd century, the 9th Legion vanishes from the official records. The most telling silence comes from a document called the Notitia Dignitatum, a comprehensive register of all military and civil posts across the later Roman Empire. Every other legion that existed is accounted for in its lists. The ninth is not. It is simply gone, erased from the imperial roster as if it had never been. This bureaucratic absence is the central, chilling fact of the mystery. An institution that documented everything, from grain shipments to the birthdays of emperors, had no entry for one of its most famous legions. What could possibly explain such a total and official silence? But the official record is not the only place we can search. To find the ninth, we must look to the land itself, to the wild northern frontier where they were last stationed. The most enduring and dramatic theory places their end not in some distant province, but right there in the misty highlands of Britannia. This is the story of the Caledonian Crucible. Imagine the province not as a peaceful, Romanized land, but as a simmering cauldron. Southern Britain had towns and villas, but the north was a different world. Beyond the frontier forts lay Caledonia, a place Romans wrote of with a mix of awe and dread. It was a land of endless rain, trackless forests of pine and oak, and sudden boggy marshes that could swallow a man whole. The mountains were not picturesque. They were dark, looming barriers, their peaks often hidden in cloud. And the people who called this place home were every bit as formidable as their landscape. The Caledonian tribes were not a single nation, but a collection of fiercely independent clans, united by a common hatred of the Roman invader. They fought in a way that baffled Roman discipline. They used guerrilla tactics, striking from the mist and melting back into the hills. They knew every hidden path, every defensible glen. For a heavy infantry legion, trained to fight in open formation on clear ground, this terrain was a nightmare. Decades before the ninth vanished, the great General Gnaeus Julius Agricola had pushed deep into this country, and the ninth legion had been with him. They fought at the Battle of Mons Graupius, where Agricola claimed a great victory over the Caledonian chieftain Calgacus, but it was a hollow triumph. The tribes were defeated in the field, but not conquered. They simply faded back into the highlands, their will to resist unbroken. The Roman army withdrew, and a fragile peace settled over a line of forts. Then, around the year 117, that peace shattered. Inscriptions tell us a new governor arrived in Britannia, Quintus Pompeius Falco, sent by the Emperor Hadrian with a clear mandate. The province was in turmoil. There is evidence of a major rebellion, a war so serious that Falco had to bring in reinforcements. The northern frontier was ablaze. And who was the primary military force stationed on that very frontier? The 9th Spanish Legion. The logic is chillingly simple. A massive tribal uprising erupts. The 9th, as the local garrison, marches out from Eboracum to meet the threat. They push into the highlands, pursuing an enemy that refuses to stand and fight. Day by day, they are drawn deeper into a labyrinth of glens and forests. Their supply lines stretch thin, the weather turns, and then in some nameless valley, the mist parts to reveal not a scattered band of warriors, but thousands of Caledonians, who have chosen their ground perfectly. The legion, trapped and exhausted, is surrounded. The battle is not a clash of armies. It is a slaughter. Not a single man escapes to tell the tale. The entire legion, over 6,000 souls, is wiped from existence. This theory answers the silence. A loss so total, so catastrophic, that Rome, in shame and shock, chose to erase the 9th from memory rather than record its disgrace. But is this what really happened? The Roman Empire knew the taste of catastrophic defeat, and its name was the Teutoburg Forest. In the year 9 AD, 3 entire legions under Publius Quinctilius Varus were lured into the dense German woodlands and annihilated by Germanic tribes led by Arminius. The shockwave from that disaster reached Rome itself, with the aging Emperor Augustus reportedly wandering his palace, crying out, "Varus, give me back my legions." It was a trauma the empire never forgot. So when we consider the fate of the ninth, this precedent looms large. Could a similar ambush have unfolded in the misty highlands of Caledonia? The theory of annihilation in battle is the oldest and most visceral explanation. It paints a picture of a final, desperate stand. We must move beyond the simple idea of a battle and into the grim mechanics of how a legion died. The ninth would not have been caught on an open plain. Their discipline was too great. The trap would have been one of terrain and deception. Imagine a seemingly routine punitive expedition, chasing reported raiders. A local scout, perhaps bribed or coerced, leads them into a narrow valley, its slopes thick with forest. The column, miles long with its baggage train, becomes stretched and vulnerable. Then the first spear falls from the tree line. It is not a volley, but a storm. A coordinated uprising of tribes, putting aside old rivalries for this one chance to destroy the symbol of Roman power, has them surrounded. The legionaries would have tried to form their battle lines, the centurions barking orders, but the ground is against them. The forest prevents their famous shield wall from locking tight. Cavalry cannot charge. It becomes a brutal, close-quarters slaughter in the mud. The legion's soul was its standard, the aquila, a silver eagle mounted on a pole. To lose this eagle was the ultimate disgrace, a stain on the legion's honor that could see it disbanded in shame. In this scenario, the eagle of the ninth would have fallen. Its loss would be the final, symbolic act of its destruction. There would be no organized retreat, no heroic last stand at a fort. The unit would simply cease to exist, its men killed or captured, its identity erased on the field. This theory finds a shadow of support in the writings of the Roman historian Cassius Dio. Writing decades later, he recorded that during the reign of Emperor Hadrian, shortly after the year 117, the Romans suffered heavy losses in Britain. He does not name the Ninth Legion. He gives no specific location. But for a historian looking at a gaping hole in the record, this cryptic note is a flicker of light in the darkness. It hints at a military disaster severe enough to be remembered, yet somehow not detailed. Was this the empire's quiet acknowledgement of a wound too deep to describe? If the ninth fell this way, it would explain the profound silence. Rome did not celebrate its defeats. A legion lost with its eagle was a shame to be buried, not a story to be told. The ninth would have been quietly struck from the rolls. Its survivors, if any, folded into other units, its name never spoken again. But a mystery this enduring rarely has only one face. Yet this theory of a glorious, bloody last stand runs into a wall of quiet earth. If 5,000 men and all their equipment vanished in a single cataclysmic battle, where is the battlefield? Archaeology has a stubborn way of demanding proof, and in the case of the Ninth Legion, that proof is conspicuously absent. We have found the sites of other Roman disasters. The Teutoburg forest in Germany has yielded a grim harvest. Fragments of Roman armor, spearheads, and even the skeletal remains of soldiers and their pack animals, all telling a silent story of panic and slaughter. For a battle of the scale needed to destroy an entire legion, we would expect to find something. A concentration of broken weapons, hundreds of hobnails from military sandals scattered across a valley floor, the distinctive fittings of Roman armor. But in the Scottish Highlands, no such site has ever been conclusively identified. This archaeological silence is deafening. It forces us to ask a difficult question. Could the earth have simply swallowed the evidence? The answer, surprisingly, is yes. The environment of northern Britain is uniquely hostile to the preservation of history. The soil is highly acidic, a condition that rapidly decays bone, wood, leather, and fabric. A fallen soldier might leave nothing behind but a faint stain in the earth, and a few corroded metal objects within a generation. Furthermore, the landscape itself is a vast, layered archive. Thick layers of peat bog, formed over centuries, can bury a battlefield under meters of dense, waterlogged plant matter. These bogs are remarkable preservatives for some things, like butter or wooden artifacts, but they can also hide a site so completely that it becomes invisible to all but the most targeted archaeological survey. There is also the simple matter of location. The most likely spot for such an ambush would be a narrow pass or a remote glen. But over 2,000 years, forests have grown and receded, rivers have changed course, and modern agriculture or even cities have been built over ancient ground. The potential site could lie undisturbed beneath a farmer's field, a modern highway, or the outskirts of a town like Perth or Aberdeen. The lack of a battlefield does not disprove the theory. It merely reminds us that the past is not always waiting to be found. Sometimes it is hidden in plain sight, dissolved by time and chemistry, leaving us with nothing but a haunting question mark in the soil. But a complete physical annihilation is not the only way a legion can die. There is another, quieter end, one that leaves no battlefield to be found because the final blow was struck not by a sword, but by a pen. This is the theory of transfer and dissolution, the administrative vanishing. Rome's legions were not static monuments. They were tools, moved across the empire's map like pieces on a vast strategic board. A legion could be redeployed from one troubled frontier to another, its strength bolstered by fresh recruits from foreign provinces. Sometimes a legion that suffered heavy casualties, perhaps in a failed campaign or a brutal rebellion, was not officially destroyed. Instead, it was quietly folded into another unit. This practice was known as Legio IX, the twinning of legions. The weakened legion would lose its independent identity. Its remaining veterans and standards merged with a stronger sister legion to create a single, full-strength unit. The old legion's number and history simply faded from the record, a bureaucratic ghost. Could this be the fate of the IX Hispana? Let's follow this paper trail. We know the ninth was in Britannia around the year 108. We also know that shortly after, the province erupted in a serious war. It is entirely plausible that the ninth took significant losses during this conflict, perhaps in a series of punishing skirmishes rather than one grand battle. They were battered under strength and no longer fit for their role as the primary garrison of the violent north. Emperor Hadrian, a practical ruler focused on consolidating the empire's borders, arrives in Britannia. He sees the weakened ninth and makes a cold, administrative decision. The legion is to be transferred. Perhaps it is sent to the Rhine frontier in Germania, which was constantly under pressure, or to the Danube, another perpetual trouble spot. The order goes out. The remaining corps of the ninth, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 men instead of 6, packs its gear. They march out of Eboracum not to glory, but to reassignment. Upon reaching their new post, they are not welcomed as a full legion. They are absorbed. Their veterans are dispersed to fill gaps in other legions, like the 6th Victrix, which we know replaced them at York. Their cherished bull emblem is retired. Their name is struck from the active roster. In the eyes of the Roman military bureaucracy, the 9th Legion no longer exists. It has been dissolved, its spirit extinguished by imperial decree rather than Caledonian steel. This theory is compelling because it explains the official silence perfectly. There was no glorious last stand to memorialize, nor a shameful disaster to hide. There was only a routine, if sad, administrative action. The legion died not with a roar, but with the soft closing of a ledger. Yet even this tidy explanation has its own mysteries. If the ninth was merely transferred, why is there no definitive record of it arriving anywhere else? A few inscriptions from places like Nijmegen hint at its presence, but they are faint whispers, not the solid proof we would expect for a legion's new headquarters. The administrative vanishing leaves one final, haunting question unanswered. If they were simply reassigned, why did their story, the story of Caesar's own legion, vanish so completely from Roman memory? Yet a single stamped tile in the Netherlands throws a wrench into the clean narrative of a Scottish disaster. Far from the misty highlands, in the flatlands of the modern Netherlands, lies the ancient Roman fortress of Nijmegen, known today as Nijmegen. Here, archaeologists made a discovery that sent ripples through the study of the ninth. They unearthed a roof tile, a simple baked clay rectangle, bearing the unmistakable stamp Leg IX Hisp. This was not a relic from the glory days under Caesar. This tile was dated to a crucial period, around the year 121 AD. This is after the legion's last clear presence in Britain, and right in the middle of the period when it vanishes from history. That stamp is a ghostly fingerprint, a piece of the ninth that ended up hundreds of miles from its supposed grave. So what does it mean? The presence of a single tile does not prove the entire legion was stationed there. Legions often sent out detachments, called vexellations, to other provinces for specific construction projects, or to reinforce troubled areas. It is entirely possible that a cohort or two from the ninth was on temporary duty at Nijmegen, helping to build or repair the fort, and they made their own roofing materials, stamping them with their legion's mark as a matter of pride and administrative record. This would be a routine assignment, not evidence of a mass relocation, but the timing makes this far from routine. If the ninth was annihilated in Britain around the year 117, how did its tiles end up in the Netherlands 4 years later? This discrepancy fuels the transfer theory. Perhaps the tile is not a stray artifact, but a clue to the legion's true fate. Could the entire ninth have been pulled out of the disastrous war in Britain? Emperor Hadrian, facing a rebellion he could not immediately crush, might have decided to cut his losses. He could have withdrawn the battered ninth from the front line and sent it east to the quieter, but still important, Rhine frontier to recuperate. The tile then would mark their new temporary home. They would have rebuilt their strength at Nijmegen before perhaps moving further east, toward the Danube, where some theories suggest they met their final end years later. Historians are deeply divided on this single piece of baked clay. For some, it is the smoking gun that disproves the Caledonian massacre. It shows the legion was alive and functioning, doing ordinary construction work, years after its supposed destruction. It points to a slower, more bureaucratic end far from Britain. For others, it is a fascinating red herring. They argue a detachment could have been sent to Nijmegen before the disaster, and the tile simply remained in use or in a stockpile long after the men who made it were gone. The date of the tile's manufacture is not the date of the legion's death. The Nijmegen tile does not solve the mystery, instead it deepens it. It introduces a frustrating, beautiful ambiguity. It tells us the ninth was not in one place, but potentially in two, stretching its story across the North Sea. It forces us to hold two contradictory possibilities in our minds at once: a dramatic death in the fog, and a slow fade on the continent. The truth might lie in the space between, in a story we have not yet pieced together. But the story of the Ninth Legion is not confined to the damp north of Europe. Its shadow stretches much further, into the blistering heat of the Judean desert. This is the Jewish rebellion hypothesis, a theory that sends the lost legion on a final, desperate detour to the very edge of the empire. In the year 132, a full generation after the legion vanished from British records, the province of Judea exploded in a revolt that shocked Rome to its core. This was not a minor uprising. It was the Bar Kokhba Revolt, a meticulously planned war for independence, led by a charismatic figure many believed to be the Messiah. The Romans were caught completely off guard. Entire garrisons were overrun, towns were captured, and for 3 brutal years, the rebellion turned Judea into a bloody quagmire. The response from Emperor Hadrian was swift and overwhelming. He poured resources into the region, eventually committing a staggering 12 full legions, nearly half of the entire Roman army, to crush the rebellion. The war was apocalyptic in its ferocity. Ancient sources describe hundreds of thousands of casualties, the systematic destruction of villages, and a landscape left scarred and empty. Into this cauldron of fire and sand, some historians have suggested, marched the IX Hispana. The logic is one of sheer necessity. Rome was fighting for its grip on a vital province. Every available soldier was needed. If the Ninth still existed, even as a weakened or reconstituted unit stationed somewhere on the Danube or the Rhine, it would have been a prime candidate for transfer. The empire was a machine, and when one gear seized, others were moved to turn it. The journey would have been epic. Think of those men, accustomed to the cool mists of Britain, or the forested river valleys of Germania, marching for months across continents. They would have traded their woolen cloaks for lighter linens, their familiar rations for strange fare, arriving in a land of blinding sun, arid hills, and a fanatical enemy who used vast networks of hidden caves and tunnels as their fortress. The fighting was unlike anything the legion had seen before. This was brutal counterinsurgency in impossible terrain. Could the Ninth, so far from home and already perhaps depleted, have met its end here? A destruction in the Judean desert would explain the total silence. A legion lost in such a distant, catastrophic war might simply be recorded as part of the colossal, anonymous casualty figures. Its specific story would be swallowed by the greater tragedy. Yet for all its dramatic appeal, this theory stands on fragile ground. The direct evidence is simply not there. No Roman historian lists the Ninth among the legions that fought in Judea. No inscriptions place it in the region during the revolt. The meticulous records of the Bar Kokhba period, including letters from the rebels themselves found in desert caves, make no mention of encountering the famed Spanish legion. Furthermore, the timeline is a severe challenge. If the Ninth was destroyed in Britain around the year 117, it could not have been in Judea 15 years later. Proponents of the Judean theory must therefore assume the legion survived the British crisis and was transferred east, only to be destroyed later, but this requires 2 separate disappearances, first from the historical record in the west, and then from the physical world in the east, with no clear trace of its journey in between. It asks us to believe in a phantom legion, vanishing and reappearing only to vanish again. While it is a compelling narrative, placing the final act of a Roman tragedy in the biblical landscape, it remains a hypothesis built more on circumstantial necessity than on hard proof. It is a reminder that when a story has a hole this large, we are tempted to fill it with our most epic imaginings. The legend of the vanished legion stretches far beyond the deserts of Judea, reaching across the entire continent of Asia. There is a tale, more myth than history, that sends the lost Romans on an impossible journey to the very edge of the known world, to ancient China. This story begins not with the Ninth Legion, but with a different Roman disaster almost 2 centuries earlier. In the year 53 BC, a wealthy Roman general named Marcus Licinius Crassus led an army of over 40,000 men into the deserts of Parthia, in modern-day Iran. He was seeking military glory to match his political rivals, Pompey and Caesar. What he found was a catastrophe. At the Battle of Carrhae, the Parthian horse archers encircled the slow Roman infantry, showering them with arrows until the legions were annihilated. Crassus was killed, and according to some Roman historians, 10,000 Roman prisoners were taken. These captives, the story goes, were marched eastward, into the heart of Central Asia, to serve as frontier guards for the Parthian Empire. They vanished into the steppes. Now, fast forward 17 years. In the year 36 BC, a Chinese chronicle records a curious event at the Battle of Judea, fought in modern-day Kazakhstan. The Chinese general, attacking a fortified town, noted that the defenders used a unique military formation. The chronicle describes a fish-scale formation, a tight shield wall that moved in unison. To the Chinese observers, this was a bizarre and foreign tactic. The mercenaries who used it were said to be tall, with deep-set eyes and dark hair. Could these have been the lost Romans from Carrhae, or their descendants, still practicing their ancestral drills thousands of miles from home? This tantalizing idea was given a modern face in the late 20th century. In a remote part of China's Gansu province, near the old Silk Road, lies the village of Legio. For generations, some of its residents have had unusual features: light hair, green or blue eyes, and tall statures, standing out markedly from their neighbors. In the 1990s, local scholars and then international media seized on this, suggesting these people were the living descendants of lost Roman legionaries. A few DNA studies were conducted, with mixed and highly contested results. Some tests showed a proportion of Caucasian genetic markers, which is not surprising given the region's history as a crossroads of Eurasian migration for millennia. But there was no specific Roman or Italian signature. The genetic evidence, at best, shows ancient mixing with populations from Western Asia, not proof of a legionary settlement. Most historians and archaeologists dismiss the Lycian legend as a persistent and romantic myth. The timeline is the first insurmountable problem. The Battle of Carrhae happened in 53 BC. The Battle of Judea was in 36 BC. That is a gap of only 17 years, not enough time for a lost group to travel thousands of miles, establish itself, and still be practicing recognizable Roman tactics as mercenaries. Furthermore, the fish-scale formation, described by the Chinese, could easily refer to any number of shield wall tactics used by various peoples across the steppes, from the Greeks to the Scythians. It was not uniquely Roman. The village of Lycion itself was founded centuries later, during the Han Dynasty, as a settlement for captured soldiers of various ethnicities. Its unusual appearances are a testament to the incredible diversity of the Silk Road, not a Roman time capsule. So why does this story endure with such power, even latching onto the mystery of the Ninth Legion? It speaks to a deep human desire to connect epic tales across the globe, to imagine these disciplined soldiers marching on and on beyond the maps, to become part of another civilization's legend. It transforms a military unit into eternal wanderers. But for the Ninth Hispana specifically, this Eastern legend is a clear dead end. The Ninth was active in Britain centuries after the Carrhae captives were lost. Their story ends in the 2nd century AD, not the 1st century BC. This Chinese tale is a beautiful parallel myth, a ghost story about Romans that attached itself to the wrong legion. It reminds us that when history leaves a blank space, folklore rushes in to fill it with a more satisfying, if impossible, journey. The Great Wall of Hadrian cuts across the neck of Britain like a scar on the land. Begun in the year 122, Its construction marks a profound turning point in Roman history. A moment where the empire stopped reaching outward and began to build a permanent barrier against the world. This monumental project began just a few years after the 9th Legion vanished from our records, and the timing is too precise to ignore. Was the wall a direct consequence of the Legion's fate? Did the ghost of the 9th haunt its very foundations? One possibility is that the wall was built as a direct reaction to a catastrophe. If the 9th was annihilated in a northern uprising, the message to Rome would have been terrifyingly clear. The tribes of Caledonia could not be conquered, only contained. Emperor Hadrian, visiting the province in the wake of the disaster, would have seen the strategic necessity with brutal clarity. No more legions would be risked in those treacherous highlands. Instead, Rome would build a statement in stone and turf, a 73-mile-long declaration that said, "This far and no further." The wall was not just a military barrier. It was a psychological one, a symbol of imperial limit. Its construction, with its forts, watchtowers, and controlled gates, represented a new defensive mindset. It was the end of the dream of an ever-expanding Britannia, a dream that may have died with 5,000 of Rome's finest soldiers. In this light, the wall is a colossal tombstone, marking the grave of an entire legion and the ambition it represented. But there is another, equally plausible connection. Perhaps the 9th was not the reason for the wall, but part of its construction force. Legions were the empire's builders as much as its fighters. The logistical effort to build Hadrian's wall was staggering, requiring thousands of skilled laborers to quarry stone, lay foundations, and erect fortifications. It is entirely possible that the 9th Legion, or a large detachment of it, was pulled from its garrison duties at York and assigned to this new, monumental task. They would have traded their swords for trowels, their patrols for quarry work. This scenario offers a different kind of vanishing. A legion on construction duty is dispersed across miles of frontier, its men spread thin in work camps rather than concentrated in their fortress. Discipline might have frayed, morale could have plummeted, and in this state of vulnerability, something could have gone terribly wrong. A localized rebellion among the workers, a devastating outbreak of disease in the cramped camps, or a surprise attack by tribesmen on an isolated work detail could have spiraled into chaos, leading to the unit's effective disintegration. The loss would have been slow and messy, not a single heroic battle, but a death by 1,000 cuts that left no clear story to tell. The wall, then, would not be their memorial, but the site of their dissolution. So we are left with a powerful, symbolic duality. Is Hadrian's wall the empire's response to the 9th's destruction? Or is it the very project that consumed them? The silent stones do not answer. They stand as a permanent monument to a shift in Roman destiny, a pivot from offense to defense that changed the course of history. Whether that pivot was triggered by the loss of a legion, or whether the legion was simply another resource spent in its making, remains locked within the turf and the mortar. The wall is the empire's most eloquent silence, a structure that speaks volumes about fear, power, and limit, while keeping the fate of the 9th a secret buried in its long, lonely shadow. We can trace the movements of legions, but the fate of a single man often disappears into the fog. To understand the 9th's end, we must ask who was leading them. The commander of a Roman legion, the legatus legionis, was not just a general. He was a senator, a political aristocrat handpicked by the emperor, serving a 3-year term to gain military prestige for a future career. His name should be recorded in stone and history. Yet for the 9th Legion in its final years, that name is a maddening blank. The last legate we can identify with certainty is a man named Lucius Aemilius Carus. honored in an inscription from the year 103 AD. After that, nothing. The trail of command goes cold for over a decade, right when the legion itself vanishes. This is more than a missing detail. It is a central clue. In the Roman world, the fate of a commander and his legion were inextricably linked. A legate who brought glory to his unit would be celebrated, his name etched into monuments. A legate who led his men to disaster faced one of two fates. He could die with them on the battlefield, a tragic but honorable end. Or if he survived a catastrophic defeat, he might return to Rome in utter disgrace, his political career in ruins, his name deliberately omitted from the official record. So what happened to the unknown legate of the ninth? One scenario is grimly straightforward. If the legion was ambushed and annihilated in Caledonia, its commander almost certainly fell with his men. He would have died in the mud of some nameless glen, his body never recovered, his story lost with the legion's eagle. There would be no monument, because there was no one left to build one. But there is another, more complex possibility rooted in Roman politics. The northern frontier of Britain was a graveyard for ambitions. It was remote, dangerous, and offered little of the plunder found in richer eastern provinces. A senator sent to command the ninth might have been seen as sidelined, or worse, set up to fail. Imagine this man, far from the comforts of Rome, facing a sudden, massive tribal uprising. Perhaps he made a critical tactical error, overextending his forces or trusting a false guide. The result was not total destruction, but a severe and embarrassing defeat. The legion was mauled, but not erased. The legate, humiliated, might have taken his own life to avoid the shame of a trial. Or he might have been recalled to Rome and quietly stripped of his rank, his failure so profound that the emperor ordered all record of his command purged. In this version, the legion's official dissolution could have been a direct consequence of its commander's disgrace. The unit was tainted by his failure and was quietly disbanded to erase the stain. This adds a deeply human layer to the mystery. It transforms the story from a faceless institutional loss into a personal tragedy of command. We are left picturing an isolated figure, standing in the headquarters at Eboracum, staring at a map of the wild north. He carries the weight of 5,000 lives and a century of legacy. Every decision he makes echoes into history. Did he march out, confident in Rome's invincibility, only to meet a nightmare in the mist? Or did he make a desperate choice that cost him everything, dooming his legion's very name to oblivion? The silence surrounding the last legate is not an empty space. It is a silence filled with the echoes of a single, terrible responsibility. The silence from Rome itself is perhaps the most telling clue of all. We must confront the frustrating reality of the historical record, or more accurately, the lack of one. The Romans were meticulous chroniclers of their own greatness, and yet, for a legion as storied as the ninth, the official history books are blank. This absence forces us to ask a more profound question. Why would an entire civilization forget one of its own limbs? The most famous Roman historian of this era is Publius Cornelius Tacitus. He wrote extensively and brilliantly about Britain, detailing the campaigns of his father-in-law, General Agricola. The Ninth Legion fought in those very campaigns, and Tacitus mentions them. But his work, the Agricola, ends around the year 84 AD. He simply stopped writing before the legion's mysterious end. Later historians who covered the 2nd century, like Cassius Dio, only provide fragments. Their full works are lost, surviving only in summaries made by later Byzantine monks. It is entirely possible that Dio or another historian did record the fate of the ninth. But that single page, that crucial paragraph, crumbled to dust 1,000 years ago. The fragmentation of ancient sources is a vast, silent library fire. we are left reading the charred edges of scrolls, trying to reconstruct an epic from a handful of scattered sentences. So the first answer is simple accident. The story may have been told, but time itself consumed it. Yet there is a more deliberate possibility. Roman emperors were masters of propaganda, curators of their own legacy. A military disaster on the scale of a lost legion was not just a tactical setback. It was a political catastrophe, a crack in the facade of imperial invincibility. Imagine the report reaching Emperor Trajan, or his successor Hadrian. News that 5,000 Roman citizens, the very embodiment of Rome's power, had been wiped out by tribesmen they considered barbarians. This was not something to be celebrated in the forums or etched into triumphal arches. This was a shame to be buried. The Roman state had a powerful tool for this, damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. It was typically used against traitors or disgraced emperors. Their names chiseled off monuments and their statues torn down. Could a similar unofficial silence have been imposed upon the ninth? Not out of hatred, but out of political necessity. To acknowledge the loss was to admit weakness, to invite further rebellion, and to tarnish the emperor's image as the guarantor of peace and security. The legion's number would be quietly retired, its battle honors left unmentioned, its veterans reassigned without fanfare. In the eyes of the imperial administration, it was better for a legion to fade into an administrative footnote than to become a symbol of defeat. There is also the matter of perspective. What was a cataclysm in distant Britannia might have been a minor dispatch in the city of Rome. The empire was vast, stretching from Scotland to the Sahara, from Portugal to Persia. Emperors were juggling rebellions in Judea, wars on the Danube, and political intrigues at home. A disaster in that rainy, northernmost province, while devastating locally, might not have shaken the capital's foundations. It could have been recorded in a now-lost military log. A single line in an imperial bulletin that was never deemed important enough for the grand historical narratives. The silence, then, is a combination of three powerful forces: the random cruelty of time that destroyed our sources, the calculated politics of image that suppressed shameful news, and the sheer staggering scale of an empire where even a tragedy of 5,000 men could be swallowed by the noise of a continent. The ninth did not just vanish from a battlefield. It vanished from the story Rome chose to tell about itself. History may have forgotten the Ninth Legion, but our imagination never could. When the official record falls silent, storytellers rush in to give the lost a voice and a fate. The modern legend of the Ninth was born not in an archaeological trench, but on the pages of a children's novel. In 1954, British author Rosemary Sutcliffe published The Eagle of the Ninth, a book that would define the mystery for generations. Sutcliffe took the fragments of fact, the silence after the year 117, and wove them into a powerful and human tale. Her story follows a young Roman officer, Marcus Flavius Aquila, the son of the Ninth's commander. Driven by a need for closure, Marcus ventures north of Hadrian's Wall into the perilous lands of the Caledonian tribes. His quest is not to conquer, but to recover the legion's lost eagle standard and uncover the truth of his father's fate. Sutcliffe's genius was in her empathy. She gave us characters to care about, both Roman and Briton, and framed the disappearance as a personal tragedy rather than just a military event. Her novel firmly cemented the idea of a heroic, last stand in the public mind, a narrative of noble sacrifice in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a story of honor lost and honor sought, and it resonated deeply because it answered the haunting silence with emotional truth. For millions of readers, the Ninth Legion story became Marcus's story. That powerful novel found a new audience over half a century later with the 2011 film The Eagle, starring Channing Tatum and Jamie Bell. The film amplifies the novel's core adventure, focusing on the journey of Marcus and his British slave-turned-companion, Esca, into the wild Highlands. The cinematic portrayal is one of stark beauty and relentless danger, where the mist itself feels like an enemy. The film visualizes the ultimate discovery, presenting the lost eagle as a sacred object held by a tribe of fierce, painted warriors, the descendants of those who destroyed the legion. This depiction leans fully into the dramatic ambush theory, offering viewers a visceral, satisfying conclusion, a final battle given form. These fictional accounts do more than entertain. They shape our collective understanding of history. For most people, their knowledge of the Ninth Legion begins and ends with the image of that eagle being reclaimed from the mist. These stories prioritize a clean, dramatic, and heroic end, a single catastrophic event that provides narrative closure. This is the power of myth, to simplify the messy ambiguities of the past into a compelling parable. The reality, as we have seen, is far less certain, filled with bureaucratic transfers, scattered tiles, and silent stones. Yet without Sutcliffe's novel, the Ninth Legion might have remained an obscure footnote known only to specialists. She, and the adaptations that followed, transformed a historical mystery into a cultural touchstone. They kept the Legion alive in our minds, ensuring that 5,000 missing soldiers were remembered not as a dry entry in a missing ledger, but as men whose fate we still feel compelled to seek. This legacy asks us a difficult question. When the facts are gone, does the story we tell about the past become its own kind of truth? The silence of the past is no longer absolute. While historians sift through ancient texts, a quiet revolution is happening beneath our feet, armed not with shovels alone, but with beams of light and invisible pulses. Modern archaeology has given us new eyes to see what was once hidden, turning the search for the Ninth Legion from a scholarly debate into a high-tech treasure hunt. One of the most transformative tools is LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Imagine a plane flying over the dense forests and rolling hills of northern Britain, firing millions of laser pulses toward the ground. These pulses penetrate the leafy canopy and bounce back, creating a fantastically detailed, three-dimensional map of the Earth's surface, stripped bare of vegetation. What appears as a gentle, unremarkable slope to a hiker can be revealed by LiDAR as the distinct, geometric ramparts of a long-lost Roman marching camp, perfectly square and hidden for centuries. These temporary fortifications, built for a single night's stop by a legion on the move, are like footprints fossilized in the landscape. Finding a trail of such camps leading north from York could chart the Ninth's final, fateful expedition. On a smaller scale, ground-penetrating radar is like giving the soil an X-ray. Archaeologists drag a sled across a field, sending radio waves into the ground. The waves bounce back differently when they hit stone, metal, or disturbed earth. This technology can outline the foundations of buildings, locate pits, and even detect the subtle trenches of ancient graves without moving a single clod of dirt. It allows for precise, non-invasive surveys of known Roman sites near York or at potential battle sites in Scotland, searching for the mass burial pits or weapon caches that would signal a catastrophic battle. Perhaps the most intimate new tool involves the legionaries themselves. Isotopic analysis studies the chemical signatures locked inside ancient bones and teeth. The food and water we consume leave a distinct geographic fingerprint based on the local geology. By analyzing the isotopes in a skeleton found at a Roman site, scientists can determine where that individual grew up. Were they from the Mediterranean heart of Italy? From the Iberian Peninsula, where the Ninth was founded? or from the Germanic frontiers, where they may have recruited later replacements. If a mass grave is ever discovered, this science could confirm whether the bodies were, in fact, men of the 9th Legion, telling a story of origin and movement that no written record ever could. This isn't just theoretical. In Britain, projects are meticulously scanning the landscape around Hadrian's Wall and far beyond, identifying dozens of new Roman sites each year. In the Netherlands, at sites like Nijmegen, archaeologists continue to sift through layers of history, hoping for another stamped tile or a military diploma that names a soldier of the 9th. Each summer, excavation teams work in the shadow of the mystery, knowing that a single trowel scrape could uncover the pivotal clue. The disappearance of the 9th Legion is not a closed case in a history book. It is an active, ongoing investigation. The narrative we have is built on fragments and theories, but it remains provisional. A farmer's plough could turn up a hoard of 9th Legion coins tomorrow. A lidar survey of a remote Highland glen could reveal the unmistakable outline of a last stand. A single well-preserved inscription found in a German fort might finally record the Legion's transfer and dissolution. The story is waiting for its next chapter to be dug up from the earth. This means the legend is still alive, still breathing, still subject to the thrilling possibility that a discovery made next week could rewrite everything we think we know. Sometimes the loudest stories are told by the quietest voices. In a waterlogged ditch at the Roman fort of Vindolanda, just south of Hadrian's Wall, archaeologists found something more fragile than bone and more eloquent than any stone inscription. They uncovered thin, postcard-sized slivers of wood, covered in spidery ink handwriting. These are the Vindolanda tablets, personal letters and military documents that survived nearly 2,000 years in the oxygen-free mud. They were written in the years just before, and during the period the 9th Legion vanished, and they pull back the curtain on daily life at the edge of the empire. We hear the voices of the men and women who lived there. One officer's wife, Claudia Severa, invites her friend Sulpicia Lepidina to a birthday party. She writes, "I warmly invite you to make sure that you come to us, to make the day more enjoyable for me by your arrival." It is a simple social note, a flicker of warmth and normalcy from a cold military outpost. But other tablets speak directly of the strain of this frontier world. There is a request for more supplies, specifically mentioning beer for the soldiers. Another document is a strength report for the first cohort of Tungrians, auxiliary unit, noting that of its full strength of 752 men, only 265 were fit for duty. The rest were sick, wounded, or away on assignment. This was the grinding reality of Roman Britain, a place of constant attrition, where a unit's paper strength was a fiction, and the line between order and chaos was always thin. These intimate whispers make the silence surrounding the 9th Legion deafening by comparison. Vindolanda was a bustling hub of communication. Officers wrote home, quartermasters tallied socks and bacon. Commanders received intelligence reports about the Britons, noting they have a great many cavalry. The bureaucracy of the frontier was meticulous and chatty. If the 9th Legion had been transferred east in an orderly fashion, there would have been paperwork, movement orders, receipts for grain. If it had been destroyed in a great battle, there would have been urgent dispatches, casualty lists, desperate calls for reinforcements. Yet in this trove of everyday documents, from a fort that was part of the same military machine, the 9th Legion is never mentioned. It is absent from the gossip, the logistics, and the reports. This is not the silence of lost history. It is the silence of a void that had already opened. The tablets show us a world in vivid, breathing detail. A world from which one of its largest and most important pieces had already, quietly, gone missing. That lost eagle standard was more than a piece of military equipment. It was the soul of the legion, a sacred object believed to be inhabited by the spirit of Jupiter himself, the king of the gods. To lose the Aquila in battle was not just a tactical failure. It was a spiritual catastrophe, a disgrace so profound that it could taint the honor of Rome. Entire campaigns were launched for no other purpose than to recover a captured eagle, and legions that lost theirs were sometimes disbanded in shame, their very name erased from the rolls. This deep cultural terror of losing the eagle is central to the mystery of the ninth. If they were destroyed in battle, their eagle would have been the ultimate prize for the victors. We can picture a Caledonian chieftain holding the gilded standard aloft, a tangible symbol of Rome's broken power, perhaps carrying it to a sacred grove or burying it in a peat bog as an offering to his own gods. This image is the engine of countless stories, from ancient rumor to modern novels and films, where the quest to recover the eagle becomes a journey to reclaim lost honor. The idea of that sacred object lying in the dark northern soil, waiting to be found, is powerfully compelling. It turns a historical mystery into a tangible treasure hunt. Yet there is another, quieter fate for an eagle. If the Ninth Legion was not destroyed, but was instead peacefully disbanded or merged with another unit through bureaucratic decision, its eagle would not have been lost to an enemy. It would have been subjected to a formal ritual of retirement. In a solemn ceremony, the standard would have been ritually cleansed, perhaps anointed with oil, and then taken to the Temple of Mars in Rome or another sacred repository, where the eagles of retired legions were kept. This was an honorable end, a dignified retirement after centuries of service. There would be no shame, only the closing of a chapter. So the fate of the eagle presents us with two completely different endings, each reflecting a different theory of the legion's disappearance. One path leads to a scene of chaos and humiliation in a misty glen, the eagle torn from its bearer's hands. The other path leads to a quiet ceremony in a Roman temple, the eagle carefully placed on a shelf among other relics. Which image feels true? The enduring power of the lost eagle story in our culture suggests we are drawn to the drama of the first. We want there to have been a quest, a physical object to recover, a symbol of honor to redeem. The bureaucratic retirement, while plausible, offers no such poetry. It offers only a quiet filing away of history. This dichotomy is why the eagle remains so central. It is not just a clue to what happened. It is a mirror for what we want to have happened. Do we prefer a legend of heroic sacrifice and a lost treasure, or an acceptance of mundane imperial paperwork? The silence of the earth has not yet given up an answer, leaving the eagle's fate, and by extension the legions, suspended between glory and obscurity. The disappearance of 5,000 soldiers was a political and military catastrophe, but it was also a deeply personal tragedy that shattered thousands of lives beyond the fortress walls. The legion was not just a fighting force, it was a community. For every legionary on the march, there were fathers, mothers, wives, and children whose world was anchored to his presence. What became of them? The Roman military system allowed for long-serving veterans to retire, often receiving a grant of land. Many chose to settle right where they had served, in the shadow of the fortress that had been their home for decades. Around the great fort at Eboracum, a sprawling civilian town had grown, known as the Canabi. This was not a random collection of huts. It was a vibrant, bustling settlement of merchants, tavern keepers, craftsmen, and the families of the soldiers. Its entire economy and reason for existence was the legion. The butchers sold meat to the mess halls, the smiths repaired armor, the weavers made cloaks, and the taverns were filled with off-duty soldiers spending their pay. Think of a modern company town, where every shop, every home, every job depends on the single large employer at its center. Now imagine that employer vanishes overnight. The shockwave through the Cannabe would have been immediate and devastating. One day the fortress gates are open, the streets are busy with men in uniform. The air rings with the sound of drills and the clang of the blacksmith. The next, there is only a terrible, echoing silence. The payroll stops. The orders for grain, leather, and iron cease. The steady flow of silver coins that fueled the entire local economy dries up. For the retired veterans living there, men who had given 25 years of their lives to the Ninth, the news would have been incomprehensible. Their pension, their identity, their entire brotherhood was gone. Their sons, who might have followed them into the Legion, now had no future there. For the families of the active soldiers, the uncertainty would have been a special kind of torture. There were no telegrams, no casualty lists delivered by a solemn officer. There was only rumor and then, eventually, a crushing silence. A wife waiting for her husband's return would first hear whispers of a disaster in the north. Then she would see the empty fortress, occupied by a new, unfamiliar legion from another part of the empire. She would have no body to bury, no confirmation of death, no inheritance to claim. In Roman law, a missing soldier's status was a legal limbo that could leave a family destitute for years. The social fabric of the Cannabe would have frayed and then torn. Without the legion's economic engine, people would have begun to leave, seeking work elsewhere. The settlement would have shrunk, some buildings abandoned, others repurposed. The vibrant community that thrived on the legion's presence would have become a ghost town haunted by unanswered questions. This human angle transforms the mystery from a historical puzzle into a story of profound, lingering grief. We are left wondering not just about the fate of the soldiers, but about the veteran who tended a small garden plot outside York, waiting for news of his former comrades that never came. We think of the merchant who closed his shop, the child who grew up never knowing what happened to his father. The disappearance of the Ninth Legion created a void filled with the quiet, desperate uncertainty of thousands of ordinary people. An echo of loss that lasted for generations in the very soil where they lived. Rome knew how to mourn its military dead, but only when it could find the bodies. The annihilation of Publius Quinctilius Varus and his 3 legions in the Teutoburg forest in the year 9 AD was a trauma etched into the empire's soul. It was a disaster so complete, so shocking, that it became a defining story, told and retold for centuries. The Roman historian Tacitus describes the scene years later, the battlefield still a place of horror, with bones scattered and skulls nailed to trees. The Emperor Augustus, it was said, would wander his palace, beating his head against the walls and crying out, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." This was a public grief, an open wound in the national consciousness. The disaster was meticulously documented because there were survivors, Germanic allies who witnessed it, and a Roman commander, Germanicus, who later returned to the site to bury the dead and recover 2 of the 3 lost eagle standards. The story had a shape, a location, and a villain in the Germanic chieftain Arminius. It was a tragedy with a clear narrative. Similarly, the disaster at Carrhae in 53 BC, where Marcus Licinius Crassus lost his army and his life to the Parthians, was a sensational political event. Crassus was one of the 3 most powerful men in Rome, a member of the first triumvirate. His death was not just a military loss, it was a seismic shift in the balance of power, directly affecting the futures of Julius Caesar and Pompey. The story was carried back by fleeing cavalry and became instant political fodder, recorded in detail because it involved the fate of a colossal celebrity. It was a high-stakes drama played out on the world stage. Now, place the 9th Legion's disappearance beside these two events. The difference is not in scale, but in clarity and consequence. If the 9th was wiped out in Britannia around the year 117, it would have been a catastrophe of similar magnitude to Teutoburg, the loss of 5,000 men. Yet no Roman historian describes a British Arminius. No emperor is recorded mourning the 9th by name. No general is sent to recover its eagle. The silence is not just about the event itself, but about the empire's reaction to it. This comparison deepens the mystery exponentially. It suggests that whatever happened to the 9th Legion was fundamentally different in nature from those famous, well-recorded defeats. Perhaps it was so total that no credible witness survived to tell the tale, leaving only confused rumors that never cohered into a history. Perhaps the loss was not a single dramatic battle, but a slow erosion over years of grinding frontier warfare, a death by 1,000 cuts that lacked the clean, catastrophic narrative of a forest ambush. Or, most intriguingly, perhaps the loss was not a military defeat at all, but an administrative decision. An emperor could not publicly grieve a legion he had personally chosen to disband and merge out of existence. The silence surrounding the 9th, when contrasted with the loud, enduring stories of Varus and Crassus, tells us something crucial. It whispers that the truth may not lie in a forgotten battlefield, but in the quiet corridors of power, where the fate of a legion could be sealed with a decree, not a sword. The reign of Emperor Hadrian marked a fundamental shift in the Roman psyche. For centuries, the empire's story had been one of relentless expansion, of borders pushed ever outward by the relentless march of the legions. Hadrian, who came to power in the year 117, looked at this vast domain and asked a radical question. What if we stopped? His answer was a new policy of consolidation, of defining and fortifying the empire's limits rather than extending them. He is famously quoted as saying, "The condition of the empire shows that it has been increased to such a size that it can easily be administered no longer." This was not the voice of a conqueror, but of an administrator facing the hard truth of overstretch. His reign was a grand strategic pivot, a conscious turning from offense to a permanent, hardened defense. The most iconic symbol of this new era is, of course, the Great Wall that bears his name. Hadrian's wall was not just a fortification. It was a 73-mile-long statement of imperial philosophy. It declared that here, in this rainy northern corner of the world, Rome's ambition ended. The wall transformed a fluid, contested frontier into a fixed, heavily policed border. It was a monumental admission that some lands and some peoples were simply not worth the blood and treasure required to subdue them. This profound change in strategy reshaped everything about the Roman military's purpose and posture. Legions were no longer primarily instruments of conquest. They became garrison forces, builders, and border guards. Their role shifted from breaking new ground to holding the line. In this new, defensive-minded empire, what was the place of a legion like the 9th Hispana? This was a unit forged in the fires of Caesar's Gallic Wars, a symbol of the aggressive, expansionist Rome of the past. Its very identity was tied to forward motion, to pushing into unknown lands and bending them to Rome's will. Under Hadrian's new order, that identity might have become obsolete, even inconvenient. So we must consider a possibility that fits the cold logic of imperial administration, rather than the heat of battle. Could the 9th Legion have been a casualty of this grand strategic re-evaluation? Imagine the scene in Rome or in the imperial field headquarters. Hadrian's advisors present the state of the armies. The northern frontier in Britannia is unstable, requiring a massive investment just to hold. The legion stationed there, the 9th, has been badly mauled in recent fighting, not destroyed, but weakened, its ranks thinned. In the old Rome, it would be reinforced and thrown back into the fight. But in Hadrian's Rome, the calculation is different. The goal is no longer to pacify the highlands at any cost. The goal is to build a stable, defensible border. A weakened, offensive-minded legion is not an asset for this new defensive wall. It is a liability. It consumes resources and represents a potential point of failure. The most efficient solution, from a bureaucrat's ledger, is not to rebuild it, but to repurpose it. The order goes down. The ninth is not to be reinforced. Its remaining effective troops are to be transferred to other, fuller legions, perhaps to the sixth Victrix, which we know took over its fortress at York. Its eagle standard is ceremonially retired. Its number is quietly retired from the active list. In the eyes of the imperial state, the legion is not destroyed. It is dissolved, its components recycled into the new defensive machine. This was not an act of malice, but of cold imperial calculus. The disappearance of the ninth, in this light, is not a mystery of violence, but a mystery of paperwork. It was not erased by Caledonian swords, but by a change in imperial policy that rendered its very reason for existence null and void. The silence in the records, then, is not a cover-up for shame, but the simple absence of drama. There was no great battle to record, only a routine administrative decision made in a distant office, a decision that ended a century of history with the stroke of a pen. Does this feel like a satisfying end for Caesar's old legion? Perhaps not. It lacks the thunder and heroism we crave, yet it aligns perfectly with the world Hadrian was building, a world of walls, not roads, of limits, not horizons. In that world, the fate of a single legion, however storied, was just another line item in the empire's new budget for survival. Discipline was the iron spine of the Roman legion, but that spine could break. We have searched for the ninth in battlefields and bureaucratic ledgers, yet there is another shadowy corner to explore, one that looks inward at the legion itself. Could the ninth have been destroyed not by an enemy, but by its own hand? The theory of mutiny or mass desertion is the darkest and most speculative of all, for it suggests a collapse from within. Life on the northern frontier of Britannia was a grinding ordeal of damp, cold and constant, low-grade fear. A legionary served for 25 years, often stationed thousands of miles from the sunny Mediterranean world he called home. The pay was modest, the food monotonous, and the danger from disease or a sudden ambush was ever present. Under a harsh or incompetent commander, a legate more interested in personal glory than his men's welfare. Morale could corrode like a neglected sword. There were historical precedents for legionary revolt. Legions had mutinied before, most famously after the death of Emperor Augustus, when troops on the German frontier demanded better pay and shorter service, their grievances boiling over into outright rebellion that required the personal intervention of the future Emperor Tiberius to quell. These were not mere riots. They were organized, dangerous protests by the very instrument of imperial power. Now, place the ninth in this context. Imagine a legion already battered by years of inconclusive campaigning in Caledonia. A new, arrogant legate arrives, determined to make his name with a grand, risky offensive against the tribes. He pushes the men too hard, ignores their exhaustion, and treats them as expendable tools. Resentment festers in the ranks. The centurions, the crucial link between command and common soldiers, feel the tension. In this scenario, the end might not come from a Caledonian ambush, but from a flashpoint within the camp itself. A punishment deemed too brutal, an order perceived as suicidal, could spark a violent uprising. The legate and his loyal officers might be killed in the chaos. Suddenly, 5,000 heavily armed men are no longer a Roman legion, but a leaderless, terrified, and desperate mob trapped in hostile territory. They have committed the ultimate crime against the Roman state. There is no going back. The mutiny theory offers a grim logic for the total silence. A legion that turns on its own is the deepest shame imaginable, a sin far worse than military defeat. If the Ninth mutinied and then fractured, Rome would have had every reason to obliterate its memory completely. Every inscription with its name would be chiseled away, every record purged. It would become a non-legion, its very existence denied by an empire that could not admit such a profound failure of its own system. A related, slightly less dramatic idea is mass desertion. Could the Ninth, or large parts of it, have simply walked away? This is harder to envision for an entire unit of 6,000, but not impossible for a disintegrating force. After a mutiny or a severe defeat, scattered groups of survivors, knowing they faced execution for their failure or their rebellion, might have chosen to vanish. They could have discarded their armor, buried their weapons, and melted into the local population. In Britain, they might have sought refuge with the very tribes they were supposed to be fighting, trading their military skills for shelter. On the continent, perhaps in Germania, they could have been absorbed into frontier villages. This would explain the lack of a concentrated battlefield and the absence of mass graves. The legion didn't die in one place. It dissipated, its men becoming ghosts who chose a new, anonymous life over a return to Roman justice. While the idea of an entire legion deserting en masse stretches credibility, the possibility of a fragmentary, disorganized dissolution fits with the patchy evidence. A single stamped tile in the Netherlands could be the artifact of a detached cohort that never returned, its men choosing to stay or scatter. The theory is a fringe one, lacking the clear evidence of a revolt or the orderly paperwork of a transfer. Yet it holds a powerful, unsettling appeal. It transforms the Ninth from passive victims of fate into active, if tragic, agents of their own destiny. It suggests that the empire's greatest strength, its legions, contained the seeds of its own potential unraveling, not through external force, but through the breaking of the human spirit under immense strain. The silence in this version is not just about hiding a loss. It is about burying a betrayal. There is a force more ancient and indifferent than any army. While we search for human enemies, the land itself can rise up in silent fury. The disappearance of the Ninth Legion might not be a story of swords or politics, but one of earth and sky. Consider the landscape they operated in. Northern Britain was a land still being shaped by the elements, where rivers could swell into torrents overnight, and sodden hillsides clung to the soil by a thread. A legion on the march was a massive, slow-moving entity, vulnerable not just to ambush, but to the terrain itself. One compelling theory suggests a natural catastrophe. Imagine the Ninth, strung out along a narrow valley road during a seasonal campaign. Unseen by scouts, days of relentless rain have saturated the high slopes above them. Without warning, the hillside gives way. A catastrophic landslide, a river of mud, rock, and ancient trees, sweeps down the valley, burying the entire column in minutes. The event would be both total and strangely clean from a military perspective. There would be no battle, no enemy to name, and no survivors to report the calamity. To Rome, receiving only silence from the north, it would be indistinguishable from a military defeat. Yet its true cause might never be known, lost in the rubble of a Scottish glen. Alternatively, the disaster could have come from the water. Northern rivers are prone to sudden, devastating flash floods. A legion caught while fording a river or camped on a floodplain could be washed away. its heavy armor turning from protection into an anchor, dragging men under. The archaeological signature of such an event would be a scattered, chaotic deposit of artifacts and bones over a wide area, easily missed or misinterpreted as the aftermath of a battle. Then there is the silent killer that needs no landslide or flood, disease. The Roman climate optimum, a period of unusually warm and stable weather across the empire, did make agriculture more reliable, but it also could have facilitated the spread of pathogens. An army on campaign, living in close quarters with poor sanitation, was a perfect breeding ground for epidemic. A virulent strain of plague or dysentery could have ripped through the ninth's ranks with terrifying speed, felling soldiers not in combat, but in their tents. A commander watching his legion disintegrate from fever might have ordered a desperate retreat, only for the sickness to travel with them, wiping out the unit entirely in a matter of weeks. This theory explains the completeness of the disappearance. A legion destroyed by plague leaves no organized enemy, no battlefield to recover, and often no one healthy enough to even bury the dead properly. It is a defeat administered by nature, one that imperial pride would be hard-pressed to explain or memorialize. The natural world theory removes the need for a grand conspiracy or a cover-up. It proposes that the Ninth Legion was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, victims of a planet that is ultimately indifferent to empires and their legions. It is a humbling thought that the fate of 5,000 men could have been sealed not by a chieftain's strategy, but by a shift in the weather, a crack in the earth, or a microscopic organism. This possibility asks us to look beyond human conflict and consider a more ancient, impersonal power that could erase a legion as completely as any army. The land itself seems to remember what history forgot. Long after the last Roman sandal crunched the gravel of a British road, the story of the lost legion refused to stay buried. It seeped into the soil and the mist, becoming part of the folklore of the very places the Ninth was meant to guard. Across northern England and Scotland, tales persist of ghostly soldiers, their forms shimmering in the twilight or heard on stormy nights. These are not generic phantoms. They are specifically Roman. In the hills near Hadrian's Wall, walkers have reported the distant, rhythmic tramp of marching feet and the faint clink of metal, sounds that approach but never reveal their source before fading into silence. In Yorkshire, not far from the old fortress of Eboracum, legends speak of a spectral army emerging from a hillside, marching in perfect, silent formation before dissolving into the air. These stories feel like echoes, a collective memory trying to give shape to a profound and unexplained absence. The land, it seems, cannot accept that 5,000 men simply cease to be, so it conjures them in mist and memory, forever marching on a duty that never ends. This folklore is more than just ghost stories. It represents a deep, almost primal need to explain the unexplained, to populate empty spaces with narrative. For the people who later farmed these fields and built their villages atop Roman forts, the physical remnants of the empire were everywhere. They plowed up strange coins, found bits of intricate pottery, and unearthed the straight, stone foundations of buildings far older than their own. The presence of Rome was tangible, yet its departure was a mystery. The legend of a vanished army provided a perfect, haunting bridge between those physical ruins and the great silence that followed. It transformed anonymous history into a local saga, a tale whispered by the fire about the silent soldiers who walked the old roads. This is how a military mystery transcends academia and becomes folklore. It answers the question in the stones with a story in the air. Today, that legacy is very much alive, woven into the cultural fabric of modern Britain. In the city of York, ancient Eboracum, the 9th Legion is a palpable presence. The Yorkshire Museum proudly displays artifacts from the fortress, inviting visitors to stand before the inscribed stones and personal belongings of the very men who vanished. Walking tours guide people along the lines of the old fortress walls, now embedded in the medieval city, telling the story of the legion that once called this place home. The mystery is a cornerstone of local heritage, a unique selling point that draws thousands of tourists each year, all hoping to feel a connection to the enigma. This fascination moves beyond passive observation. Across the country, dedicated reenactment groups meticulously reconstruct the life of a Roman legionary. They spend countless hours and personal resources hand-stitching tunics, forging accurate armor, and practicing the complex drills of the legion. For these enthusiasts, the goal is not to solve the mystery, but to resurrect the legion's spirit, to make the silent past speak through the clatter of a shield wall and the glow of a campfire. When they march in public displays, they are giving physical form to the ghost stories, making the legend walk again in the sunlight. The story of the 9th has become a permanent thread in the tapestry of the British landscape. It exists in the archaeology beneath York, in the tourist pamphlets, in the performances of living history groups, and in the old tales of phantom armies. This enduring fascination tells us something important about our relationship with the past. We are not satisfied with cold facts and silent gaps. We crave narrative, connection, and meaning. The mystery of the 9th Legion provides all three in abundance. It offers a historical puzzle, a touch of the supernatural, and a profound human tragedy, all set against the dramatic backdrop of Rome's wild frontier. The legion may have vanished from the imperial record, but it achieved a different kind of immortality. It became a legend, and in doing so, it ensured it would never be truly lost. The stones of Eboracum may be silent, but the story they inspire is one we insist on telling over and over again. The evidence for each theory forms a detective's whiteboard, covered in frantic lines connecting clues, contradictions, and dead ends. Let's weigh them side by side. First, the annihilation in Britain. The case for it is powerful in its narrative simplicity. It fits the historical context of a major rebellion around the year 117. It explains the profound official silence, as Rome would have buried the shame of such a catastrophic defeat. The legend of a final stand resonates deeply with our need for a dramatic, conclusive end. Yet the case against it is the stubborn silence of the earth itself. No battlefield has been found, no mass graves, no concentrated debris of a broken legion. While the acidic soil of Scotland can dissolve evidence, the total absence of any clear site after centuries of searching is a significant mark against this theory. Next, the transfer and dissolution. This theory has gained substantial academic support, primarily because of that single stamped tile from Nijmegen, dated to around 121. It provides a tangible clue that the legion, or part of it, was alive and functioning years after its supposed destruction. It aligns with known Roman practices of merging weakened legions. It perfectly explains the bureaucratic silence, as an administrative disbandment creates no dramatic story to record. The case against it, however, is one of frustrating incompleteness. If the 9th was transferred, where are the records of its new posting? Why is there no definitive inscription from a fortress on the Rhine or Danube naming the 9th as its garrison? The tile is a clue, but not a conclusion. It proves movement, not a final fate. Then we have the Eastern theories, the journey to Judea or the mythic march to China. The case for the Judean hypothesis is one of imperial necessity, placing the legion in the epic, documented catastrophe of the Bar Kokhba Revolt. where a unit could be lost in the colossal casualty figures. The case against it is a near total lack of evidence. No historian lists the 9th there. No inscriptions place it in the region. The timeline is also a severe stretch, requiring the legion to survive the British crisis, only to vanish again 15 years later without a trace. The Chinese legend, while a beautiful story of eternal wandering, is a clear chronological impossibility, attaching itself to a different Roman disaster from a different century entirely. So where does this leave us? The transfer theory currently holds the most traction in scholarly circles because it works with the hard evidence we do have, the Nijmegen tile, and aligns with standard Roman procedure. It is the most logical, least dramatic answer, but logic has not solved this mystery. The enduring power of the story lies in what is missing. In any investigation, the absence of a body makes a definitive verdict impossible. Here we are missing 5,000 bodies. That absence is the void at the heart of the legend. It is the space where the dramatic ambush can still haunt the mist, where the bureaucratic transfer feels like an unsatisfying epilogue, and where the ghost stories continue to breathe. Until the earth gives up its secret, or a document is found that ends the debate, the whiteboard remains filled with possibilities, each one keeping the lost legion alive in our imagination. We have walked the damp highlands and sifted through imperial ledgers, listened for whispers in the clay tiles and the ghost stories told by the land. The fate of the 9th Legion remains, stubbornly, one of history's greatest cold cases. No single piece of evidence is conclusive. Every theory, from the brutal ambush to the quiet administrative erasure, fits some of the facts but leaves others unexplained. The battlefield eludes us. The final roster is lost. The eagle was never recovered. This 2,000-year-old silence is the mystery's most compelling feature. It endures not because we lack clues, but because the clues point in so many contradictory directions, leaving the truth suspended in a realm between history and legend. Perhaps that is why this story holds such power over us. It is more than a military puzzle. It is a mirror. The vanished legion reflects the fragility of even the most disciplined and mighty empires, reminding us that all power, no matter how solid it seems, has its limits and can simply fade from the record. It speaks to the vast gaps in our knowledge, the humbling reality that for all our technology and scholarship, the past can keep its secrets locked in the soil forever. And ultimately, it taps into something fundamental in the human spirit, our relentless desire to solve a puzzle, to fill a blank space with a story, to find an ending where history offers none. The 9th Legion marches on, not in stone or steel, but in our collective imagination. So now the question passes to you. After this journey through the evidence and the echoes, which path feels most true? Do you see their end in the Caledonian mist, in a solemn ceremony in Rome, or somewhere else entirely? The case remains open. Share your verdict in the comments below. And if you crave more journeys into the shadows of the ancient world, subscribe for our next deep dive into the mysteries time left behind.